Dear Secretary General, thank you very, very much to have us today.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Last time we met here just on eve of this disaster pandemic. And I remember this interview with you. I want to start our interview today with this book about some interviews, including yours, of this time. And here you see interview with you, which I don't know how you'll read it in Russian, but anyhow.
I'm not able.
But, you know.
But you will allow me one comment. This is a book about power.
Formula of power, yes.
I mean, and I'm here.
Yeah.
Let's have no illusions. The Secretary-General of the United Nations has very little power, not as the power of an head of state of an important country, and not much money. But there are two things that the Secretary-General of the United Nations has. One is a voice. But that voice is also only important if that voice is faithful to the United Nations Charter, to international law, and if that voice is at the service of those that are underprivileged in this world, of those that are the victims of inequality in this world. And at the same time, we have a certain convening capacity to bring together people of goodwill to address the challenges of our time. And I'll give you just one example. Artificial intelligence is the item that everybody discusses today. And there were several initiatives of different areas from different parts of the world. Well, I was able to bring together 49 people half from north, half from south, half men, half women. Of course, 49 means that there is one more of each. And with Russians, Americans, Chinese, Israelis, from all Brazilians, South Africans, from all over the world, to look into how we can have some form of governance to make AI a force for good and not a problem for the world, and what can the UN do for that. And what's amazing is that I was able to bring from governments, from the academia, from the companies, from the civil society, these 49 people, and they were able to come to an agreement on governance of AI at global level, that of course has some limited dimension. Many aspects will be done country by country according to the country's capacities and policies. But it was possible to bring them together. No other organization in the world would be able to bring together American, Russian, Chinese, Israelis, Africans, etc., and come to an agreement on a central issue of our time. That is the way I see power. Power is not the exercise of power by brute force. Power is to bring together the people that is people of goodwill and to do that according to the values that created the United Nations.
Dear Secretary General, this explanation confirmed that your position here is absolutely right. That's a formula of power of Secretary General.
Very kind of you.
I want to go back to our last meeting when first time from you I heard what pandemic. And United Nations made and played a significant role to overcoming this global disaster. But time passed and new challenges we can see in the world. To what extent, in your opinion, can the United Nations to respond to these new challenges?
Well, let's be clear. I'm not happy with what I'm doing, and I'm not happy with what the UN is doing. I would like to do much better, and I would like to do much more. There are things I'm very proud we are managing to do. For instance, the humanitarian action of the UN all over the world is remarkable. You have thousands and thousands of people in the most dangerous places that are sacrificing sometimes their lives in order to bring the necessary assistance to those that have been the victims of conflict, the victims of climate change, of natural disasters of all kinds. And indeed, half of the world international humanitarian aid is channeled to the UN I was myself 10 years High Commissioner for Refugees, looking into the drama of refugees around the world. The UN, in that regard, I think is doing a fantastic job. On the contrary, there is an area where the UN should do much better: peace. We have no peace in the world. Of course, one of the reasons why we have no peace in the world is because of the geopolitical divides, of power relations that are not clear as they were in the past. But we would need to do much more in prevention of conflict, and we would be able to do much more after a conflict is solved in creating the economic, the social conditions, the human rights conditions to make sure that peace, once established, is maintained. And unfortunately, we are seeing many places in the world where it's very difficult to solve a conflict, and that it's very difficult after the conflict is solved to create the conditions of justice, of equality, and of well-being of the people for peace to be sustainable.
You know, I've been working on United Nations issues for the last 25 years. And all this period I've hearing that United Nations need reforms, especially Security Council, and all these 25 years I have hearing this. And how long do you think these reforms are? How soon they can be implemented? And what of them you can find the consensus?
Well, let's be clear. For a long period, this was a taboo. And I would say that it was now during my mandate that for the first time there is a recognition that this is a serious question that needs to be discussed. Not an easy question, but a serious question. I mean, the Security Council was formed after the Second World War.
Yes.
And just to give an example, Europe is a relatively small continent. But in the 15 members of the Security Council, there are today 6 Europeans. And of the 5 permanent members, 3 are European. The Russian Federation, of course, has an Asiatic part, but it is essentially a European country. France and the UK. And there is no African member in the permanent members of the Security Council. And of course, it will be very difficult to change all these from one moment to another, but we should start by something in which a consensus might be possible. And I think today, when I listen to the permanent 5, there is one thing where I believe a consensus would be possible: to have at least one African permanent member of the Security Council.
That's the first step.
That is a first step. And obviously, I think more developing countries should be in the Security Council, which means to enlarge it a bit. And then there is the very difficult question of the veto, in which there is no way the veto will disappear. But there is some progress now in the relations between the Security Council and the General Assembly. Whenever there is a veto, there is an explanation given to the General Assembly. So I think there are things that can be improved in the working methods of the Security Council. And this is important. It's important to strengthen the efficiency and the legitimacy of the Security Council, because we in the UN as a whole pay a heavy price when the Security Council is not able to solve a problem.
You mentioned Russia as a permanent member of the Security Council. Russia was one of the founding countries of the United Nations. Looking respectively, how you generally assess the contribution of Soviet Union and Russia in strengthening and formation of the United Nations?
Well, the Soviet Union and Russia were absolutely essential for the United Nations to be formed, and they are a fundamental pillar of the work of the UN. Of course, it's a big country, it's a big power, and I have to say that the problems we have in the UN normally come from big powers, which means that it is very important to keep a very open, frank dialogue, and to have a relationship that is always aiming at solving our problems instead of aggravating them.
There are now dozens of world organizations, global organizations in the world today are not members of the UN family. For example, BRICS or Shanghai Organization of African Union or Organization Arabic Solidarity and so on. It seems the role of this organization becoming more and more significant. They are competitors or partners to United Nations. How you work with them?
They are today fundamental partners of the UN. And one of the things I want, if you look into one of the reforms we've managed to have, was exactly to allow the Security Council to mandate peace enforcing and counter-terrorism operations done by partners, namely the African Union, but with assessed contributions, with the financial support of the UN, because the UN was not able to do it. So there are a number of situations in which the regional organizations can solve problems the UN cannot solve. So they are essential partners for us. The African Union, the European Union. I'm going to the Shanghai Cooperation Council
soon,
in the week after this interview is taking place.
In Kazakhstan.
And several other organizations, from small groups like CARICOM to Shanghai Cooperation Council that has more than half of the population of the world. All these organizations are fundamental for us, and we have a forum. Every year I invite, with the COVID this got complicated, we are going to restart now, but every year I would invite the Secretary-Generals of all the organizations for a meeting, and I intend to do it again soon, in which we discuss how better we can work together. I have not a vision that the UN is the center of everything. I'm more and more convinced, as problems are more complex, situations are more difficult, that the capacity of regional organizations is essential to solve the problems, because they know better. They connect. In peace, if there is a conflict between two countries, the region knows much better the details of the conflict than a global organization. And so, more and more, we are betting on our cooperation with regional organizations like the ones I've mentioned and several others.
You know, I had great honor to interview 5 of your predecessors. Kurt Waldheim, Perez de Cuellar, Boutros Ghali, co-founded, Pagimon, and all of them made worthy contribution to the United Nations. But in regard to this, can you say briefly which of these predecessors most remembered in the United Nations?
Well,
I know that to compare is not a good way.
First of all, I have a huge debt of gratitude to Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan has brought me to the UN at the time as High Commissioner for Refugees. And before that, I had an extraordinary cooperation with Kofi Annan in the efforts of the international community to solve the problem of Timor-Leste, that today is an independent country. And that created an enormous admiration for Kofi Annan. And Kofi Annan has left a fantastic legacy. I mean, if you look at his reforms, the Human Rights Council, the Millennium Development Goals, a number of extremely important contributions to strengthen the UN. Peace building, another area where he made a huge difference. So, with a lot of admiration for all the others, I have to say that in my heart there is this very special link with Kofi Annan.
Secretary General, you are close to a quarter of your second term. And honestly, you're very well known in the world as a very, very modest person. He was very modest Prime Minister in Portugal. He was very, very high commissioner in the United Nations. And it's world knows this. But at the same time, people say that last 7 years were most successful years in the whole history of the United Nations. Well, people say that. And what do you think, what your achievement in the past 7 years was the most important? And what you want to accomplish in the next 3 years, which you have?
Well, I never speak about my achievements. First of all, because they're not mine. They are of the whole people that work around me. And it's for the others to judge, not for me to judge myself.
You confirm what they say about your models.
But I have some key concerns in the present period, and these are the reasons that have motivated me to launch the Summit of the Future. We need to finally revert the present trend on climate change. And we need to mobilize the international community in solidarity and in justice because justice is very important, and the developing countries are in a much more difficult situation, and they need to be strongly supported. We need to be able to revert the present trend in which we are still moving with emissions growing and which climate change getting worse and worse every year. And this is an area where I would like to make a difference. Again, no power, no money, but a voice and some convening capacity. Second is in relation to the new technologies. We have a huge inequality in the world. And that is something that since I was a volunteer in a students' organization working in the slums of Lisbon, the question of poverty, of hunger, of inequality is for me a central question. And if I want to do something useful in my life is to reduce that. And we have now fantastic technologies, especially the digital world, artificial intelligence. But they can be a factor to correct inequalities. They can be a factor to create progress. They can be a factor to unite, but they can also be a factor to increase divisions. We developed countries more and more developed, and developing countries lagging more and more behind. And so a second big concern that I have at the present moment, and the reason why we created this high-level body, is exactly how can we make sure that the new technologies are going to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and are not going to make that gap even wider. And then there is, I would say, the fundamental of all questions. The United Nations was created for peace. And in peace, we are in trouble. And I mean, I would like to be able to do whatever I can with the knowing that, I mean, again, it's only the voice and it's some capacity to bring together people to see if at the end of our mandate, some of the most dramatic conflicts that we have today in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Sudan, that at the end of my mandate, they would be solved.
You mentioned one of the most important problems is climate changes, and this November will be the big conference, COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan. Are you planning to attend this conference?
Of course.
And what's your expectation of this
I've
conference?
always attended the COPs. I go to in the beginning, I go in the end.
Yes.
And my expectation is exactly that this will be a moment of change, in the sense that a moment of global recognition that we are moving to the abyss. The last 12 months were the hottest, each one of them, in history.
Absolutely.
And for the first time, we have now scientists saying that we're going to have, very probably in the next few years, an overshooting above the 1.5 degrees.
Yeah.
Of course, it doesn't mean that it is irreversible. No, I mean, the objective is 1.5 degrees is a long-term objective. If there is an overshooting, we need to work hard to make it short and to completely revert the situation. But we are in a very dramatic moment, and I would like to see in this COP some drastic measures being taken, but again, with climate justice. Measures in which the interests of developing countries that are suffering, do not contribute to climate change, but are suffering so much, with the small islands that look the rising sea level, African countries where drought is devastating communities. I mean, to see if we can take decisions that at the same time reverse the trend of climate, but at the same time respond to the needs of those developing countries that are already under a dramatic impact and need the resources. And the resources have not been there. Absolutely. And developed countries must assume their commitments and must contribute more effectively to the solution of the problems facing the developing countries under the pressure of climate.
Despite all the criticism and discussions around the United Nations, I think both of us, you and I, agree that the United Nations has long life ahead. Let's imagine our meeting next, let's say, 30 years. We'll be still young, but maybe retired. What is your view? What is your thinking about the future United Nations in this short period, 30, 40 years?
It's very difficult. I mean, to be honest,
I don't put easy questions.
nobody knows what will happen in
But
the
you have
next
to
50 years. But I would like one thing. With technology, that will be completely different. The relationship between work and leisure will be completely different. There will be lots of activities that do not exist today. The structure of societies will be different. Political systems might change. But one thing I would like in that moment to be preserved, those values that have allowed the United Nations to be born, the values that are in the Charter, and above all, human dignity and human agency, that machines are not able to replace human beings in the key decisions that need to be taken about our future.
Thank you, Secretary-General. You are very, thank you. It was absolutely interesting and so.
Thank you very much.
And let me, before we are leaving,
Спасибо большое.
вам спасибо.